pleased that we had such a great turnout of people here and such an interesting group of panelists. I want to start the day off by some early principles, the design principles that are fundamental principles in HTML5, and match them with some developer strategies so that we can get, as designers and developers, a better idea of exactly what the core values are within HTML5 so that we can do our jobs better and more efficiently, and also understand some of the goals and efforts of the HTML5, both the W3C working group and also the WHAT working group, which of course is where HTML5 began. Could you please advance the slide? So, is to support existing content. Slide advance. You'll notice that in my pictures here, we are doing HTML5 gang signs. For those of you who don't yet know the gang sign, I'd like you all to now perform the gang sign with me if you are physically able to do so. Okay, everybody got that? Great. So when we look at supporting existing content, the critical issue is that we have, you know, in a few short, less than a few short decades, we have amassed, and I mean amassed, an amount of data, information on the web that is just almost incomprehensible. That content needs to be kept in perpetuity if you think about the principles of the web. So in order to do that, we as developers have to often find our way around, you know, as we try to progress with emerging technologies, find our way to gracefully degrade, and that's not always a possibility. But for those of you who are interested in using HTML5, one of the things you can first start doing is by starting with the HTML5 doc type. And that sounds a little simple, and it is a little simple, and I'm sure that the guys will talk a little more about what happens beyond that. But this is if you want to start upgrading or changing that, you can go ahead and drop that in. You want to rely on behavior and your style, but of course the markup has to be nice and strong as well. So basically you want to be able to deliver any content that existed to any device that will come along down the road. So the Gutenberg project, which many of you might be familiar with, which started very early on, like 93, 94, before we even had Mosaic, I believe. That started, and that kind of data needs to be accessible in all ways. So this is where we can deliver a non-styled, perhaps minimal functional site to even the most modern browser. So we have to really rely on those techniques and use the progressive enhancement where possible, but always rely on degradation. And when I say graceful, I don't mean that, you know, that in a design way. I mean that in aesthetically, that's always good if you can achieve it. For me, the more important thing is, can the person get to the content? That is what we are talking about in this principle. A very important message that I'd like to talk to you about is an issue we're having a great deal with at Opera Software. We are now seeing the emergence of so many different user agents. Back in the days when it was just Netscape and IE fighting it out, and I don't know if many people remember this, but the early part of the Web Standards Project emerged not because of CSS issues, but because of incompatibilities with the DOM, with the Document Object Model. And these problems were such that the solution was to use user agent string sniffing and send one experience to one browser and another experience to the other browser. Okay, and this practice is still being done for desktop browsers, and it is actually an arcane practice. It was a quick solution for the times, and it needs to be let go of. We need to start changing from user agent number sniffing and user agent string sniffing, and go to what we call feature sniffing. And those of you familiar with Modernizer and similar JavaScript libraries would be very familiar with that. You're looking for features as opposed to user agent strings. This is a critical piece of information because as we grow, as the web goes from the desktop to devices all around the world, we have increasingly more user agent strings, and it becomes just a confusing mess for you. So good practice right now. Get rid of any JavaScript related user agent string sniffing, use feature detection. Okay, so that's number one. Please advance. Whoops, sorry about that. I thought I was advancing my own slides. Please advance. Okay, number two, another really, really important thing, perhaps the most important thing that we do not have. We'll see some of the key developer and designer choices that we can choose from. Advanced slide, please. Excellent. That's my colleague Divya there, also giving you the HTML5 gang sign. Interoperability is a core ideal of the web. When it was being cooked up at CERN by Tim Berners-Lee and David Kalu and their partners and colleagues, basically one of the things that they were really trying to do was to create an open data format. In that case, they had the internet as the critical network. Yes. Yes.
No, I was just, there was some static there. Sorry, just please continue.
Okay, I'm sorry. Are we better?
Yep, better.
Okay, so I was referring to Tim Berners-Lee at the time of the awakening of the web and how interoperability was such a core idea. It was, in essence, the motivating factor behind what ultimately we see as the web. And of course, we are fragmented. We are not interoperable in an ideal way. So the way that we really want to kind of strategize this is developers and designers really interested in keeping the web open is to stick to open standards wherever possible. You need to work to keep your applications accessible. And I know that Tati is going to talk to you about Way Aria, so it's good that I even have this little introduction there. Learn and prepare documents using Way Aria now, and he'll tell you a little more about that. That's accessibility for rich internet applications. Avoid vendor lock-in and proprietary methods where possible. I mean, we live in the real world. In my imaginary world, we're only using open source and open standards to do just about everything, right? But this is not the pragmatic world, and we're often either on legacy systems or on CMSs or other content management methodologies that we have to deal with despite even knowing better. So we have to work around those problems. So where it's possible, we try and conjoin these things. Learning to use the proprietary methods in a way that doesn't influence what is ultimately delivered to the user in their experience. Okay, let's advance the slide. Max, it'll be a double advance because it's just first slide and then get to the, yeah. So define user agent behavior. This is the third design principle. And again, we have another HTML5 gang sign there. If you learn nothing from my session, you'll have learned how to do the HTML5 gang sign. One of the essences here is that we solve problems from real world issues, and the concern there is that when we set out in the early days to build languages for the web, HTML and then evolving HTML, evolving CSS, so much that we now have to be able to work from the real world issues. So we at What Working Group both might seem a little overwhelming in terms of detail is because we are now working hard to explicitly define how every element, attribute, or behavior acts, okay? And the specification is largely, in my opinion, for user agent implementers and tools makers. But the best practices will come from our developer circumstances and what's in our toolbox, okay? So the specs themselves really are going the distance to make it as clear as possible. I mean, this is the ideal. It's not always the case that it happens, but it's certainly the ideal to have this explicit nature in the spec so that there is less discrepancy between implementers. This is a very good thing ideologically. So hopefully that will help us see a more smooth implementation process as we go through that with browsers. Next 2 slides, please. So the fourth, I'm sorry, that was the fourth, which went by quickly, but that's about error handling. You don't have to go back. It's okay. It's about better handling errors in browsers. So there's also, along with this explicit defining of what the user agent should do, there's also supposed to be an explicit specification for how errors are dealt with. And it doesn't support the draconian error handling ideologies in general. One of the things that you may have heard of is HTML5, and I really suggest, if you have heard of this, this is basically HTML5 with a means of a syntax that allows you to send it as application XML. Okay, and that is there, in my opinion, for people who are already doing that sort of work, and it doesn't leave them behind, right? Again, incorporating what's been done, right? So, but I'm not so sure that that is something that most designers and developers are going to be using, and I personally would avoid that right now simply because of the way errors are so rigorously handled in XML applications. So errors should also be consistent across user agents. I mean, this, like, think about CSS for a minute, and yellow where it's supposed to be a dark gray, and in the other browser you have black, which is correct. Clearly the one browser is trying to assume what you're making, what you're trying to ask for. The other one is saying, I don't understand this, I'm not giving you any style. To me, that error handling in the second case is far more helpful. You can then pull up the page and go, oh, something's not right. Clearly there's something wrong because my style is not applying. So in the same sense, this is going on in HTML5 in terms of principles, ideologicals, okay? And ever be logical. This helps us, errors that we get, just saying, like instead of tossing us an error that makes no sense, give us a logical error. And for the final, number 5, as we finish up here, we'll go to that. And this probably is the most visionary. Doesn't seem to be going. There we go. Okay. So I see that we are constantly fragmenting things out, talking about the mobile web as if it were a unique platform, making it a unique platform in some cases, things of that nature that I think are terribly detrimental to some of these core principles that exist in HTML5 that have been in existence since the very early days. We just now have that critical mass to look at. We have the wheel. We don't have to recreate it. We have to really look at the critical mass of techniques over the entirety of the web's life. It worked well in us here today. When we think about it, 15 or so years is a very short period of time to have literally changed the world to the point where we're doing a session like this. We have to acknowledge and include what already works and what doesn't work. Be encompassing of our errors, be forgiving of our errors, and learn from them. Build on real-world use and test cases. This is a very critical point that we do from we learn from what we have, not what we think we have, and that we avoid that reinvention and evolve what we have now. And those, my friends, are the 5 fundamental design principles of HTML5 and the ways that we as developers can begin looking at those principles and put them into action. It's been a pleasure spending time. I'm going to stick around and listen to my fellow speakers and be around for questions at the end of the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so in this session, in this slide, I'm talking about the way that the languages and the specifications of the W3C emerged were really what I would call cart before horse, okay? Because we were building from what we assumed people would need. not what we did not have real use cases. We did not have, not on that particular protocol, not on that particular platform. So